Every civilization has a beginning. But the deeper archaeologists dig, the more they realize something surprising. The roots of civilization may have begun far earlier than humanity once believed. So what suddenly made the wheel of time spin faster? The story begins in a world just waking up after the Ice Age. If Göbekli Tepe makes us question whether the story of civilization began earlier than anyone once believed, then to find the true starting point, we must travel back several thousand years further. Before agriculture, before cities, and before states, there was a small decision that changed the course of human history forever. For the first time, people chose to stay. For nearly 300,000 years, Homo sapiens lived as nomads. They moved with migrating herds, followed the changing seasons, and searched for reliable sources of water. When food became scarce, entire communities moved on. There were no permanent villages, no territorial boundaries, and not yet any concept of a homeland. In the Levant, between roughly 15,000 and 11,500 years ago, the Natufian communities chose a different path. They continued hunting, gathering, and harvesting wild wheat and barley, yet they also began building permanent settlements. Archaeological research and radiocarbon dating show that in many places, sedentary life appeared before agriculture became the primary source of survival. At the site of Ain Malaha, archaeologists uncovered stone houses that were repaired and occupied across multiple generations. Inside were basalt grinding stones weighing dozens of kilograms, along with sickle blades coated in a glossy layer of silica, the unmistakable traces of long-term grain harvesting. This suggests that the Natufians were not yet farmers, but they had already developed systematic ways of exploiting wild grain fields and had begun storing food to survive periods of scarcity. An even greater transformation emerged in the way they treated their dead. The Natufians began burying their ancestors beneath house floors or beside their settlements. At Hilizantaktit, a woman of ritual status was interred alongside turtle shells, eagle wings, and numerous rare objects. From that point on, a dwelling was no longer merely a shelter. It became a place where memory, belief, and collective identity were preserved. When ancestors rested beneath the very ground on which people lived, that land acquired a new meaning for the first time. It became a homeland. Ancient DNA studies also reveal that multiple generations of Natufians lived continuously within the same settlements while still marrying into neighboring groups. This demonstrates that they were simultaneously creating stable communities and maintaining networks of exchange with the wider world. At Ain Malaha, archaeologists discovered the approximately 12,000-year-old grave of a woman buried alongside a young dog. It is one of the earliest direct archaeological pieces of evidence for the relationship between humans and dogs. From hunting companion to member of the community, dogs gradually became part of human society, marking the beginning of the longest biological alliance in human history. Humans did not settle down because they had already learned how to farm. Rather, settlement itself created the pressure that forced them to invent agriculture in order to support growing populations on the same land. Villages were not the result of the agricultural revolution. They were the foundation that made it possible. Yet just as these first communities were beginning to put down roots, Earth suddenly changed the rules of the game. A cold period, lasting more than a millennium, was approaching, reducing natural food supplies and pushing these young settlements into the greatest survival crisis they had ever faced. It was this climatic upheaval that would compel humanity to take the boldest step in its history, the invention of agriculture. About 12,900 years ago, as the global climate was gradually warming after the last ice age, the northern hemisphere suddenly fell into an intense cold period known as the Younger Dryas. This phase lasted about 1,200 years, from 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, and is considered one of the clearest abrupt climate shifts ever recorded in Earth's recent history. In the Levant, where the Natufians had begun to settle down, the climate became colder and drier. Fossil pollen analysis shows that forests became thinner, grasslands expanded, and wild wheat and barley populations declined significantly. Gazelle herds also changed their migration routes in search of new food sources. Suddenly, settlement itself became a disadvantage. Nomads could leave when food ran out. But communities that had built stone houses, dug food storage pits, and buried their ancestors beneath their floors could not easily abandon everything. Archaeology shows that many Natufian villages shrank or were abandoned, while some communities were forced to return to a seasonal mobile lifestyle. Yet not everyone left. Some people chose to stay, and that decision changed history. They began actively shaping their living environment, gathering the best seeds, planting them near their homes, then returning to care for them and harvest them in the following season. This was not yet full agriculture, but it was the first time humans tried to make nature produce more food instead of merely taking what was already available. One of the clearest pieces of evidence comes from the site of Tel Abu Huraira along the Euphrates River. The people living there exploited cereals with increasing intensity and began unintentionally selecting plants with traits that made harvesting easier. Across many generations, thousands of small repeated decisions quietly changed the genomes of cultivated plants. This was the beginning of domestication. Scientists today do not consider the Younger Dryas to be the only cause of agriculture. The research consensus suggests that agriculture emerged from many factors working together: climate change, population pressure, the development of settled communities, and the accumulation of knowledge over thousands of years. Looking back, this is an astonishing paradox. Earth seemed to be trying to pull humanity back into the age of hunting and gathering. Yet that very crisis pushed humans toward an entirely new evolutionary path. It was not war, not a king, and not a single genius, but climate itself that forced humanity, for the first time, to learn how to change nature instead of only adapting to it. That was the turning point that opened the age of agriculture, but it was also the beginning of another paradox. Life for the first farmers would not be easier than life for hunter-gatherers. They worked harder, faced more disease, and depended on harvests more than ever before. So why did humanity still choose that path? They were no longer only searching for food. They had learned how to create it. And from here, humanity stepped into the decision that would transform all of history, the agricultural revolution. At first glance, this seemed like an obvious step forward. Farming and animal herding promised a more stable life than hunting and gathering. But archaeology tells a different story. For hundreds of thousands of years, hunter-gatherer groups used hundreds of different plant and animal species, creating a diverse diet. By contrast, the first farmers in the Fertile Crescent became increasingly dependent on only a few crops such as wheat and barley. Just one failed harvest could push an entire community into famine. In return, agriculture offered an advantage that hunting and gathering could never provide. It produced more food on the same area of land. That was the turning point. When food supplies became more stable, more children survived, populations grew faster, and settlements expanded. Jericho became one of the largest pre-pottery Neolithic settlements from around 9,500 BCE. Mehrgar preserves early evidence of farming and herding in South Asia from around 7,000 BCE. And Çatalhöyük was home to thousands of people living together in a dense community, reflecting a social scale that earlier hunter-gatherer groups had never reached. But that victory came at a cost. Studies of human skeletons from the early agricultural period showed that average height declined, tooth decay increased, and bones and joints carried many signs of heavy labor. The lives of the first farmers were not healthier. In many places, they were even harder than those of their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Another change was also unfolding quietly. As humans lived in concentrated settlements and kept livestock close to their homes, the distance between people and animals narrowed. This created the conditions for many animal pathogens to gradually adapt and spread to humans. Modern studies show that this process laid the foundation for many infectious diseases that would later emerge in densely populated societies. That is the greatest paradox of the agricultural revolution. If we judge it by the life of each individual, it was not necessarily a better choice. But if we judge it by the ability to feed more people, expand populations, and build increasingly larger communities, agriculture won almost completely. Most importantly, for the first time, humans possessed things they could not carry with them when they left: fields, food stores, and livestock. And it was precisely when wealth began to accumulate that an entirely new question appeared: who owned it? The agricultural gamble finally delivered its greatest reward: surplus. And from that surplus, humans unknowingly invented a concept that would shape all of history that followed: wealth. For hundreds of thousands of years of hunting and gathering, possessions were almost limited to what a person could carry: a spear, a stone knife, or a few personal objects. No one could accumulate too much, because tomorrow the entire group might move on again. But with settlement and farming, everything changed. Fields, food stores, livestock, and houses could last for many years, even many generations. A family with a good harvest could keep more seeds, expand its fields, raise more livestock, and continue increasing its wealth. After only a few generations, the gap between rich and poor began to appear. Archaeology shows that in early Neolithic communities such as Uruk, differences were still small. But in later societies in Mesopotamia, larger houses, larger food stores, and graves containing many valuable objects reflected the accumulation of wealth by certain families. Inequality did not appear immediately, but it had begun to form. When wealth could be passed from parents to children, the family also became the first economic unit in history. Inheritance rights, ownership rights, and the idea of our land gradually replaced the relatively equal sharing lifestyle of hunter-gatherer groups. That accumulation quickly drove trade. The volcanoes of Anatolia provided obsidian for making sharp blades, while Mesopotamia had fertile alluvial soil, and other regions possessed copper, salt, or natural bitumen. Instead of producing everything themselves, communities began exchanging with one another. Modern geochemical analyses show that many obsidian artifacts in the Levant originated in Anatolia, more than 800 kilometers away. These discoveries prove that long before wheels or roads existed, humans had already built long-distance trade networks connecting many regions of Western Asia. Trade also created labor specialization. Not everyone farmed. Some people specialized in pottery, metallurgy, weaving, or transporting goods. Society became more efficient, but also more complex. As goods, property, and transactions multiplied, human memory began to become the greatest limit. How could anyone remember how much grain remained in each storehouse? Who had exchanged grain for livestock? Which family still owed a debt from the previous harvest? A small village could rely on memory, but a society of thousands of people could not. And to solve that very problem, humanity would create an invention that changed history even more profoundly than the wheel: writing. What is fascinating is that humanity's first information revolution did not begin with books, poems, or stories about the gods. It began with bookkeeping. Around 8000 BCE, in Mesopotamia, archaeologists found thousands of clay tokens. Small pieces of clay in different shapes, such as cones, spheres, and discs. According to the research of archaeologist Denise Schmont-Besserat, each shape represented a type of goods or a unit of counting, such as barley, oil, sheep, or goats. They can be seen as the first transaction records in history. Imagine a farmer bringing 20 sacks of grain to a temple storehouse. Instead of relying only on spoken memory, the manager would give him the corresponding number of tokens. That way, both sides knew exactly how many goods had been delivered without depending on memory. But as exchange became more frequent, a new problem appeared. What if someone lost or switched the tokens? To solve that, the Sumerians placed the tokens inside a hollow clay ball called a bulla. then sealed it with the cylinder seal of the owner or administrative authority. If the seal was broken, everyone would immediately know that someone had interfered with what was inside. A bulla can be understood like a sealed envelope, and the seal like a signature today. Then one very simple idea changed history. Instead of shaping tokens and placing them inside a bulla, why not press their symbols directly onto the surface of the clay? Around 3,400 to 3,200 BCE, in the city of Uruk, they developed into cuneiform, the earliest complete writing system we know of. What is surprising is that the first text did not tell stories of kings or heroes. Most were simply accounting records. How much grain had entered the storehouse? Who received rations? How many livestock there were, or who still owed taxes? On one clay tablet appears the name Kushim, which many scholars consider one of the oldest personal names ever recorded. That reveals a very interesting truth. Writing was not born to tell stories. It was born to manage a society that was becoming increasingly complex. Along with writing, an entirely new profession also appeared: the scribe. They spent many years learning hundreds of signs, practicing writing on clay tablets with reed styluses, and recording every activity of temples and governments. They tracked grain stores, taxes, contracts, and transactions. If farmers created the food that fed society, then scribes created the information order that allowed society to function. Writing did the same thing more than 5,000 years ago. For the first time, information no longer depended on the memory of a single human being. It could continue to exist long after the writer had died. Thanks to that, laws could be preserved, ownership could be confirmed, contracts could be protected, and food stores could be managed accurately. A small village could still function through memory, but a city with tens of thousands of residents could not. It was precisely when humans learned to store information outside the brain that they also gained the conditions needed to build the first cities. And from those cities, civilization would enter an entirely new chapter. Between roughly 4,000 and 3,100 BCE, along the basin of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the city of Uruk grew at a speed never seen before. At its height, Uruk covered about 250 to 400 hectares and had an estimated population of 40,000 to 50,000 people. For nearly 300,000 years before that, humans had mostly lived in groups of a few dozen individuals. Now, for the first time, a massive community had appeared. Seen from above, Uruk looked more like a living body than a collection of houses. Each resident was like a cell, and what kept that body functioning was not the strength of any single person, but an entire system. This is the key difference between a village and a city. A village depends on people who know one another. A city depends on rules, information, and the division of labor. At the center of Uruk stood the Inanna temple complex, dedicated to the goddess Inanna. It was also the economic and administrative center of the city. Food from the fields was brought into the temple storehouses, recorded in cuneiform, and then distributed to potters, metalworkers, builders, and scribes. Because of this, for the first time, people could spend their entire lives doing only one job. It was this specialization that allowed labor productivity and technology to develop faster than ever before. To feed that body, Uruk built a network of canals connecting the Euphrates River with fields and residential areas. At first, they were used for irrigation, but they quickly became vital transportation routes. Boats carrying grain, wool, oil, and raw materials moved back and forth every day. If Inanna was the heart, then the canals were the blood vessels, carrying life to every corner of the city. And writing was the nervous system. Without clay tablets recording information, no one would know how much grain remained in storage, who had received rations, or which merchant caravan had just arrived. One clear example is the tens of thousands of beveled rim bowls discovered at Uruk. Many archaeologists believe they were produced in nearly standardized sizes to distribute grain rations to a large labor force. Uruk was also the center of a vast trade network. Archaeology has found copper from Anatolia and Iran, obsidian, wood, and many valuable raw materials transported there from hundreds, even thousands of kilometers away. During the same period, sailboats became increasingly common on river routes. While the wheel, appearing around 3,500 BCE, was first used to transport goods before serving warfare. When combined with irrigation, trade, and writing, these inventions turned Uruk into a system that could operate on its own and keep expanding. But as more cities like Uruk developed, a new question quickly appeared. Who would manage all of these living bodies? The answer would open the next chapter of human history, the birth of the state. When the first cities were already functioning like living bodies, a new question immediately appeared. One city could manage itself, but when many cities shared the same river, competed for fertile land and trade routes, who would set the rules of the game? That question led humanity into an entirely new era, the birth of the state. Between roughly 3,100 and 2,300 BCE, the lower Mesopotamian region formed a series of Sumerian city-states such as Uruk, Lagash, Kish, Eridu, and Nippur. Each city-state had its own territory, central temple, irrigation system, army, and administrative apparatus. For the first time in history, humans did not belong only to a family or tribe. They became citizens of an institution. Clay tablets excavated in Mesopotamia recorded the collection of taxes in barley, the division of land, the distribution of rations to workers, the counting of livestock, and the signing of contracts. For the first time, power was enforced through writing, records, and administration, not only through military strength. But as wealth increased, conflict also became unavoidable. Land, water sources, and trade routes became strategic assets. War was no longer merely conflict between small tribes, but became organized warfare. The steel of the vultures from the city-state of Lagash shows troops equipped in a coordinated way, fighting in formation under unified command. This is one of the earliest pieces of evidence for an army organized and sustained by the state. Amid the constant competition between city-states, around 2334 BCE, one figure completely changed the history of the Near East: Sargon of Akkad. After conquering many Sumerian city-states, he built the Akkadian Empire, often considered the first multi-territorial empire recorded in history. Sargon's greatest achievement was not only victory on the battlefield, but the ability to manage a vast territory. He appointed loyal governors, maintained a network of scribes, issued written orders, and controlled tribute collection across the entire empire. For the first time, a person could obey the command of a king they had never met in their entire life. From here, many concepts familiar to us today began to take clearer shape. Borders to define territory, officials to represent the government, taxes to maintain the state apparatus, and army, diplomacy to maintain relations between states, and laws to resolve disputes. Before it, the Sumerians had the Code of Ur-Nammu, around 2100 to 2050 BCE, one of the oldest known written law codes. What is astonishing is that after more than 5,000 years, the modern Uruk operating on foundations laid in the time of Sumer, taxes, law, administration, records, borders, and the power of institutions. But as power and wealth became increasingly concentrated, a new chapter also began to open, the chapter of empires, inequality, and wars that would shape the rest of human history. From a single seed planted in ancient alluvial soil, humans created a constantly evolving system for managing society. Although the first kingdoms have fallen into ruins, their legacy does not lie in collapsed stones, but in the very way we think and operate the world today. The dawn of civilization has never truly ended. It is only transforming into harsher and greater chapters in the chronicle of humanity. Thank you for staying with WUFO Space until the very end of this journey through the vast universe. If you found this video interesting and insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to WUFO Space so you won't miss our next cosmic adventures. Your support means the world to us and fuels our passion to keep exploring the wonders beyond.